Yesterday, the U.S. Supreme Court, as I mentioned in the program, agreed to hear a case involving a Colorado law that prohibits licensed counselors from having conversations with minors that, quote, attempt or purports to change an individual's sexual orientation or gender identity, end quote. The legacy media likes to call it conversion therapy for so-called LGBTQ plus children. But it's really a ban on any conversation that doesn't align with the left's radical gender ideology. So will the Supreme Court see through the left's efforts to silence and villainize counselors who are simply trying to help young people navigate through gender dysphoria? Well, joining me now to discuss this and more, Dr. Jennifer Bauwens, the director of the Center of Family Studies here at the Family Research Council. Dr. Bauwens has worked extensively as a researcher and a clinician, providing trauma-focused treatment to children in foster care and behavioral health settings. Also, adults who have experienced interpersonal traumas. Dr. Bauwens, thank you for joining us. Always great to see you here in studio.
Thanks for having me, Tony.
All right, so let's unpack this. So the court actually has two different cases that are somewhat related. I want to talk about this one first. This law has been criticized as being one-sided. For example, it reportedly allows counselors conversations that aim to steer young people toward a gender identity different than their biological reality. But it prohibits conversations that help them try to bring alignment to their mind and body.
Yeah, that's right. So what this case is addressing is the one direction of free speech, right? So as long as you're offering gender affirming or some kind of affirming conversation to a gender identity, a false identity, then it's okay. But if you are a counselor who believes that sex is binary and you can't change it, it's immutable, and you are you have a worldview that's going to bring you to a place of, let me find out what's really going on with this person. And you not trying to convert someone, but you're trying to understand what's really going on.
Right.
Then that speech is prohibited according to the Colorado law.
And we're talking about having conversations.
We're talking about conversations. And just to be clear, so when we talk about conversion therapy,
that sounds pretty intense.
It sounds very intense, but it's not. We call it counseling bans. So we're saying you're prohibiting me from acting in my professional field. But conversion therapy, they try to say, well, you're shocking people, you're doing all these horrific things.
Shocking is in terms of electrodes and laboratory and
Right, things that we already have laws against.
So that doesn't happen. That's not what we're talking about.
That's not what we're talking about. We are talking about me saying to my client, is there anything else going on in your life that are, like Walt would say, I love Walt's statement, what caused you to stop liking who you are?
Yeah.
And that's pretty blunt. I mean, most counselors wouldn't go that blunt. But that's, in essence, the heart of this question is what's going on with you that you're deciding to shed your God-given identity?
So is it safe to say the media has been deceptive in the way it's covered this topic?
I know it's shocking, but I would say so.
So let's talk about these bans for just a moment, because I believe the first one may have originated in California, but we're now talking about, I think, 25 states across the nation prohibit licensed counselors who have been trained to find out what's kind of going on in someone's life to help them bring, this alignment, as I said earlier.
Right.
And they're prohibited if it's in this one category of gender identity.
Yeah. And if you look at intervention research, which I used to teach intervention research to master's students, you have the variable that you're trying to change, right? And in this case, you're trying to change the distress that a person is experiencing over their gender. So, we're trying to reduce that. That's the goal. And what these activists and these laws are saying is you're not allowed to do that any other way than what we say is allowed.
Okay, so that leads us to actually another Supreme Court case coming out of the state of Tennessee, which the court heard a month or so ago, and that is a policy that actually FRC helped originate, the SAFE Acts, which prohibits experimental drugs and irreversible surgeries for minors as a result of gender dysphoria.
Yes, and we should be backing away from gender affirming care. We should be protecting children, and there's the Skermeti case, and the Supreme Court is what is also going to be heard. And these are such important rulings that will affect minors across our whole country.
So help me wrap my mind around this, because about 26 states have these SAFE Act type laws that prohibit, again, experimental drugs. And the reason we call them experimental is because they were not designed for the application that they're being used for.
That's right.
And then we have surgeries that are irreversible. You start cutting off body parts, you can't put them back.
No.
So help me understand this. We have half the states that have banned counseling to help bring about this, again, alignment of one's God-given biological reality with what's happening up here.
Right.
So the states are saying, no, you can't do that, but you can cut off body parts.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
I mean, it's really a division in this country. I was talking about this yesterday with Al Mohler. It really shows the contrast, the worldview that cuts down the middle of our country.
Right. And if the goal of these treatments is, again, to reduce distress, then you have to look at the science that's behind these procedures. And I mean, if you're looking at the science alone, you're gonna side with the Skermeti case. You're gonna say Tennessee has a right to protect its youth, and along with the other states that have invoked these, and you're gonna say counselors have a right to investigate what are the real causes, because the science. Right. The science is there to say that these procedures are not helping kids' mental health. It's actually harming. When we look at suicide rates, it's actually harming. So, when you think about it, Tony, when we're talking about free speech and, that it's only in one direction, well, think about, I'm no lawyer, but if you look at, if you can't be in a crowded theater and yell fire because of the harm that could come to people, what about people who claim things about science and claim things that, for example, you say that your kids, it's better to have a live son than a dead daughter. Your child's going to commit suicide.
We make them professors.
Right, we do. We make them professors and we give them tenure.
So let me just dispassionately, I know that's difficult, at least for me, to look at this issue, but as a professional counselor, now I'm not a licensed counselor, I did pastoral counseling, but as a counselor, professional licensed counselor, is it not your goal to take the least invasive approach to resolve an issue, and it kind of escalates as if this doesn't work, then we'll go another level. If that doesn't work, we go another level, rather than jump into cutting off body parts first?
Right. Well, and again, if 85% of minors desist, in other words, they back away from that gender identity, if they're left alone, that is just leaving alone. Just leave them alone. And if that's the case, if that's what a number of
85%.
studies, 85 is about the average.
So let me just, so our listeners and viewers understand that. So a young person going through the developmental stages, and of course there's a lot of social contagion out there that's driving these high numbers. So they have this gender dysphoria. They're not sure that they're male or female. They think they're in the wrong body. If you just leave them alone, if you just leave them alone, 85% of them are going to get a course correction, and they're going to come out on the other side of this aligned.
Yes, and that's that's better than many psychological interventions. That rate of success is better than many psychological interventions.
So let me say this. Let me ask you this. So 85% if you just leave them alone.
Yeah.
So what if you allow them to have some level of counseling where they can just talk through these issues and try to find out, maybe there was some trauma in their past, maybe they've been abused, maybe they're trying, this is a defense, a self-defense posture that they're taking. Does that not increase that percentage of those who are going to come out on the other side?
Most likely that would be the case. I don't know about the research on that, but it certainly is intuitive and makes sense that that would be the case because clearly something's going on with these kids, especially nowadays with the population that is identifying, where it used to be young boys, now it's young women, and past puberty. So there are other things going on than what it used to be. And a curious counselor should be investigating. A curious researcher or academic should be asking questions. Just from the sociological phenomenon of it, you should be looking at this going, what is going on in the Western world where this is a switch in populations who are experiencing this? That's a great dissertation right there.
Okay, so let's look at these. We got just about 4 minutes left here, Dr. Bauwens. So I would say two court cases that are diametrically opposed.
Yes, in some ways, and yet they're also very related in that they're all getting at the psychological care of minors. And one is saying, you have to affirm. And the other is saying the practices that you're using to affirm are causing damage.
So I don't see how the court could strike down the Tennessee law, which the Scarametti case, which says a state has a right to protect children from these experimental drugs and these irreversible surgeries. I don't see how they could strike that down and at the same time uphold a California ban that says you can't have any kind of therapy to bring about proper alignment.
Yeah.
How do you do that?
I'm not really sure. They're very inconsistent, but we're in a world that's very inconsistent at the moment.
So I would definitely say this is something to pray about.
Yeah, it's absolutely something to pray about.
This is a big deal because the Trump administration, by executive order, has prohibited, within its realm of authority, this gender reassignment surgeries, and so that's been it's actually I think about 6 days ago out of Maryland. They're still upholding that ban on that executive order, but this is quite significant going forward as to what will be the policy of our nation. Can we help kids by working through these issues, or are we going to just allow them to start cutting off body parts and masquerading as a person of the opposite gender?
Yeah, and I think all of this is getting to a bigger issue. I wrote a piece about this in the Washington Times and around the first of the year, and basically talking about the systemic issues that we have in the counseling profession, and that if those are not addressed, then we will continue to see more practices like this, more problems. Because I'll just give you one example. My code of ethics at one point says that, and this changed in 2008, by the way, that you will not discriminate against those who have a different sexual orientation or gender identity. So that ethical code changed for many of us who had already been practicing to say that, we're violating our ethical code if we are basically not affirming. And so you have a whole profession who's organized around these codes. It's, in a sense, already, And
those codes have been politically driven by agitators and outside interest.
Yes. But you have whole professions that have been constructed around these codes.
Well, it's not just the counseling field, it's the medical field.
Yeah.
So this is we're at a pivotal moment as a society on whether or not we're going to go forward based upon truth or based upon a lie that deceives and ultimately destroys.
Yes.
Dr. Bauwens, always great to see you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, good to be with you, Tony.